Been to the gym now. I feel better. Uh, Daring to liberate ourselves from the power of shame. And as we talk about power, always remember there's only one power, true power. That's God, the good, omnipotence. But sometimes we allow things to have power over us in the human condition. And shame is one of those. And, I was thinking about this thing, well, how do you talk about shame, as I said earlier, and keep it, lift it up? And at times you can't. That's all there is to it. You have to talk about it. One of the things that we have talked about in the last few weeks is Patty Bittner started off this series with her journey and daring greatly to follow a journey that was led by her heart to make a change from 30 years in one denomination as a minister to coming to unity as a minister, because some of her belief systems changed as she examined them. And then the following week I talked about this idea of wholeheartedness, being wholehearted, that feeling like we are enough, that we are open, we're willing to think from the heart, to feel from the heart, to be in the moment and be an expression of God through the heart. And then last week I talked about the idea of not enough, that we live in a society that does not believe it is enough, and even more concerning at times is we have people who believe they are not enough. And the challenges that creates for someone to really live in a prosperity consciousness as they honor themselves, as they start to believe they are more than enough, and each of us is more than enough. And today we're going to talk about another thing, and it's called shame. Now, Emily Cady, who wrote Lessons in Truth, her first chapter was all about bondage or freedom. We can live in bondage or we can choose to live in freedom. But if we're not careful, we get caught up in the bondage and aren't willing to look at what we need to in order to become free. We have to look at that shadow side from time to time, and that's what we'll be doing this morning for a while. But there's always a way out of the shadow side, by the way, which is the good news. There's always an opportunity to grow through the shadow side and become even stronger and more open and more vulnerable in life. As we look at this idea of shame, I think there are 4 levels that I want to share with you of not shame, but 4 levels of thinking or feelings or emotions that sometimes lead to shame if we don't look at them in the moment. The first one is the word embarrassing, that sometimes we do things that are embarrassing. Anybody here done something that's embarrassing before? Yeah, sure, okay. Well, let me share you one of mine. It was a long time ago, all right? A good friend of mine, he was 37 years old, had a heart attack and died. Totally unexpected. Looked like he was the bill of health. And so we all gathered at his home, a few of the close friends, with his wife. And we're sitting around, and everybody's trying to change the subject, and somebody says, one of the things I really want to do is one of the things I'm planning to do is go to the Grand Canyon. Now, as soon as they said that, I went, oh, yeah, because that was my dream, to go to the Grand Canyon. So what did I say? I said, I'm dying to go to the Grand Canyon. And it was about like that. Nobody laughed, okay? And I went, oh my gosh, and I was so embarrassed at what I'd said. And finally, a few moments later, his wife, bless her heart, started laughing. And she said, that was a pretty appropriate statement that you made, okay? And it gave some levity, but at the moment it was very embarrassing to me to say something like that. Like, what in the world are you thinking about, Richard? And a few friends of mine afterwards said, what in the world were you thinking about, Richard? Saying something like that, okay? And I didn't know what I was thinking about. I was just using something that I use as a statement from once in a while that I no longer use as a statement to make an expression. That's embarrassing. And embarrassment usually, again, can be turned into a joke. We look at it, we laugh about it. It's just something we did, okay? Something we said, the way we acted that may have been embarrassing to us in a moment. The second idea that moves towards shame is humiliation, that we can be humiliated. Everybody in here probably in their lifetime has been humiliated publicly by somebody. Maybe it was in school as a school teacher. Maybe it was a minister. I hope not, but maybe it was a minister. Maybe it was a parent. Maybe it was a boss. What happened to me was many years ago again. I hate saying that many years ago, but it's the truth. That I'm not ashamed of it, but it's the truth. And so anyway, but many years ago, I was an employee working for a guy, and I was a district manager, and we were doing really well. But one of the sales meetings, he decided to kind of come after me and belittle me and humiliate me. And it made me angry. But I was smart enough, since he was my boss, not to call him out in front of everybody, okay? Because I didn't want to lose my job. But at the same time, I had to talk to him, even if it meant losing my job. So I went to his office after that happened, pretty much close to immediately after it happened. And I sat down and I said, I really don't understand this. I'm your leading district manager. We've done extremely well. Things are going well. And yet you belittled me, and you made fun of me, and you even spoke sharply of some of the things I was doing. And I don't understand that, and I'm not willing to live with that. And if I need to quit, I'll quit. But I will not accept that kind of behavior. I don't think I said it quite that nicely or quite that evenly, but that's what I was saying to him. And he did an interesting thing. He stopped and he thought about it. And he said, I think what I was doing is our office here isn't doing as well as your office is doing. And I think that bothered me. And so I took it out on you. And I apologize. That's pretty open, right? That was cool. And then what we did is talked about some things we could do so that maybe I could support his office in that case, because he wasn't able to be there all the time. He had several district offices. And so anyway, we came to an idea that led to some support and then led to some success because we were willing to talk about it. But anytime anybody humiliates us, we have every right to go and talk to them about that and share with them about that in a positive and loving way. I will not say mine was positive and loving then, but at least I shared it. And you see, we're vulnerable when we do that. We're willing to take a risk. We're willing to say, this is what's right. And we're really willing to say, I have self-worth. I am important. And please honor that. And so, this idea of humiliation. Then the third thing that starts to move into shame, if we're not careful, is being guilty, feeling guilty. Now, all of us do things that we feel guilty about. Some of them we don't want anybody to know about. We aren't willing to share it even, okay? I haven't got much left that I don't share with you folks from time to time over what's happening in my life. But there are a few things that maybe if you push me, I'm not comfortable telling you because I am ashamed or feel guilty about what I did. Now, the difference between guilt and shame is that when you feel guilty about something you have done, that's one thing. I feel guilty about an act. But when I move to shame, what happens is I feel bad about myself. I can feel guilty about something I've done, but when I start to feel bad about myself, when I start to blame myself because I'm not enough, when I start to see myself as not having the power that I should have, not being vulnerable, but instead being in bondage to this idea of shame. All of us have shame. It's okay. We've been taught to have shame. But we can release it. We can manage it. We can live through it. And as we do, we are able to see ourselves in a different light. We're able to step forth and be that manifestation of God because we're letting the power that God is move in and through us and be the expression of who we are and what we are. And as we do that, we are able to look at shame in a different way. Brene Brown, the author of Daring Greatly, which is a book we're using, said in her book that there was a fellow who came up to her after she did a shame seminar. Now, can you imagine? We're going to have a shame seminar today, and we want you to come to it. Yeah, okay? And that's what she does. And this woman really wanted to come to it. And her husband said, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard. And she said, I want you to come with me. And he said, I'm not going to go to a shame seminar. He's telling Brene Brown about this. And finally, he went. And as he made his commitment to go, or was kind of forced to make a commitment to go, He said he was shamed into it. That what happened is that he started complaining about it, you see. And finally his wife said, if you will not be quiet about this, because I'm not going to enjoy the seminar if you can complain the whole time. And so he shut up. And he went to the seminar. And afterwards he went for Brené Brown and said it was the greatest thing he had done. And he said he was really surprised because he didn't think he'd get anything from it. And he asked her if she was a Harry Potter fan. And she said, I love Harry Potter. I've read all the books 2 or 3 times. I've watched the movies. I love Harry Potter. And he said, well, do you remember the twinkle light quote? And it goes like this. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of light. That was what Emily Cady was saying many years ago about the idea of moving from the shadow into the light. That if we discover and willing to look at what bonds us, what keeps us in bondage, that's the only way we're going to become liberated. And so we have to sometimes look at what we call that shadow side. What Myrtle Fillmore said was, God is the one perfect life flowing through us. God is the only reality of us. All else is but a shadow. Whether she knew it or not, she was obviously talking about that shadow side. The things that are not true about ourselves that we believe are true. And shame is one of them. They went ahead to talk, this man and Renee, and as they talked about Harry Potter, he said, do you remember when Harry was worried that he might be bad because he was angry and all the time he had dark feelings? And she said, yeah, I do remember that. And he said, do you remember what Cyrus Black said? And she said, this is one of my favorite quotes. Cyrus said to Harry, you're not a bad person. You are a very good person who bad things have happened to. Besides, the world is not split between good people and bad people. We all have dark and light inside of us. What matters is the part we choose to act on. How we control ourselves, how we look at ourselves, how we grow is what really matters. That's the important thing. It's not that we experience shame. It's just recognizing that we experience shame is what's important. And in her studies, and we don't have time this morning, but one of the things that happened is that she spent her first 5 years looking at women in shame. For some reason, she didn't think men had shame. And she gave a seminar one night, and a guy came up to her and said, tell me what you've done about studying men's shame. And she looked at him and she said, well, I haven't studied men's shame. He said, I didn't think so. You need to. And she started looking at it. And as she started to look at it, she found that men and women have different areas of shame. One example for men is to be employed. One fellow, you may have heard this story before, one fellow would get up every morning after he was fired, get dressed, and go off like he was going off to work. And it took him 6 months to find a job. And when he found a job, he told his wife about it. And she said, I knew about it, but I didn't want to admit it. They both were living in shame. But he was feeling it because he wasn't doing his thing as what a man should do. Women have different areas of shame. Image, the Barbie doll effect. If you don't look like Barbie doll, something's wrong with you. And even if we say, no, that doesn't bother me, it probably does to some degree. Because that's what we're trained to think like. And it's so untrue. It's so untrue. We're not supposed to look like Barbie doll. We're not supposed to look like G.I. Joe. We're supposed to be ourselves and accept ourselves the way we are. Because you're more than enough just the way you are. And there's a thing called shame resilience. That's the way she puts it. She says that shame is there. But what we have to do is be resilient in the face of shame. That there is a way to embracing our vulnerability so that shame kind of has no power over us. We come back to that. There's only truly one power. And what she talked about is that unless we're willing to be vulnerable, we cannot let ourselves be seen if we're terrified by what people might think. What in your life holds you back because you're terrified or scared of what people might think? What is it that you're not doing you really want to do? That because people might think badly of you, it might be embarrassing, it might be uncomfortable, that holds you back. And when you really look at it, you're probably looking at some form of shame. When we are not good at vulnerability, Brene Brown says, we are really good at shame. So there are 4 elements, or 4 steps, if you would, to shame resilience. They're not steps, they really are elements. One is to recognize the shame in yourself and understand how it triggers itself. When we experience shame, we go from the front of our brain to the reptile portion of our brain. And when we go to the reptile portion, when we experience shame, we either want to run or we want to stay and fight. And there's not much in between. And when we fight because of shame, we're not really kind to one another. And when we run, what really happens is we feel and we become disconnected, even to the one you love the most. When you do that, you feel disconnected. And what we all want to do is feel connected, because we are created in oneness. We are created as love. We're created to have relationships. We're in this world to have relationships so that we can grow spiritually. We're in this world to have relationships so we can help others grow spiritually without telling them they have to do that. And so we have this opportunity to recognize shame and understand its triggers. And as we start to understand its triggers, like any sane person, what we do is we start to become critically aware of when we're acting out of shame. And then we become critically aware of how we can change that, how we can be different, how we can say, yes, I'm experiencing shame, but I can let go of that. And it means that I have to be vulnerable, that I have to reach out to others. And we must reach out. It's important. Now, I'm not suggesting you put it on the front page of the Richmond Times-Dispatch or the New York Times, okay? I'm suggesting that you find somebody that you trust, that you can talk to. You find somebody you can trust, who sees the wholeness in you, who loves you enough that you can be vulnerable enough to share what you're experiencing with that person or in some other situation. Brene Brown says that every time something happens to her that she starts to feel some shame, or she expresses herself in not a very positive light because of the shame she feels, the defensiveness she can have, that she goes to her husband and talks to him about it. And she has another friend she goes to. And they discuss it. But they know, and she knows, that she can trust them. So to go to somebody you can trust, go to somebody you can talk to who will understand your pain and not hold you accountable because of it. And so we reach out. And then the 4th thing we can do is we can speak to our shame. We can speak to our shame, to ourselves. We can go internally and we can say to ourselves, I am experiencing shame, but what do I do about that? How do I reach out with that? How do I share that story if I need to? And with whom do I share it? So we let the shame speak to us, and we speak back by taking action. We speak back by stepping into the truth of who we are, by recognizing that we are that manifestation of God. And what that means is that we have that desire, again, as I said, to connect and to love and to be loved. And when we have that desire, that's where we move towards. We don't want to move towards disconnect. We don't want to move towards shame. We want to move towards connection and love and being one with one another, of growing together. One of the wonderful things I happen to think that happens in this church, that people are vulnerable in this church. They take risk. They share themselves. And they do it in good taste. Thank goodness, okay? And so, I don't know why that's funny, but it's the truth. But anyway, they do it in good taste. And anyway, that vulnerability is so powerful in allowing Spirit to flow in and through us. It is powerful because it is loving, because it is caring, because we connect together. No matter what you have experienced on your life's journey, you can love yourself and love others. The most important part of what Brene Brown talks about is learning to love yourself. If anybody sitting here says, I don't love myself enough, work on it. You can do that. You've been created in love. You've been created as love. And when we start to connect to that, we start to honor that, we start to think about that. We start to look for loving acts and loving people It's reinforced in us. And it's only when we love ourselves that we can truly love others. If we don't love ourselves, we can't be that expression of love because we're lost. We're in bondage, as Emily Cady says. And what we want is to be liberated, to be free, to feel that love moving in and through us, with ourselves and with others. And so when we come to understand we have been created as love, and we grow in consciousness, we are able to share our love and accept the love of others. To share our love and to accept the love means I am vulnerable and willing to live in vulnerability. That's a tough thing to live in. We're taught just the opposite. We're taught how not to be vulnerable. We're taught how to protect ourselves. But yet, it takes courage to be vulnerable. It takes courage to change our thoughts. It takes courage to face our shame. And when you face it, the one power takes over. And that's the presence of God. And it eliminates the shame in that moment, in that time. And so, just know that light and openness and vulnerability and knowing that I am enough overcomes shame. Don't be ashamed. There's nothing to be ashamed of. We're in this human condition together. And I'll guarantee you I can take 10 people and put them together and have a discussion about some given item, and all of them will have experienced that same thing in a different way. And when they open up to each other, that's the beauty of dialogue, healing takes place. And the healing takes place because we understand that we are spiritual beings and we're growing in spiritual consciousness. And we don't allow our humanness to get in the way. Oh, time to time we do. But when we are thinking about it, when we are aware of it, we step into the light. We become manifestations of God. And when we do that, shame is left a long ways away. Thank you.